Joining me now from our bureau in New York City, Vice President of American Innovations and Counterterrorism expert, Grant Haber. Grant, I'm hearing from every once in a while I do peer in on the mainstream media, our so-called competition, but they're really not. We're kind of in a league of our own, I think, here. But the bottom line is I was listening this morning, and they keep demanding from members of Congress or whoever they can put in front of a television camera solid evidence, some sort of solid evidence, which is probably classified, by the way, but some sort of solid evidence that a strike against the United States or United States targets was imminent. What more information do they need that this guy is, after Osama bin Laden was knocked out, is the #1 terrorist, effectively, certainly the mastermind of terrorism in the world, and the fact that our embassy in Iraq was attacked? And I hate to play whataboutisms, but I'll throw one more thing in there. I don't remember these people saying this when Barack Obama took out Osama bin Laden. They didn't have a problem with that.
Double standards. Graham, it's a pleasure to be back on your show. Thanks for having me here today. What the American people and the president need to understand is that Iran, for these last 18 years of war and even beforehand, have been providing the insurgency with support in the form of explosive precursors and expertise. They don't need to fire the bullets to kill the American troops when they can sit back and provide the bomb-making materials that are being used to kill and maim U.S. troops in high numbers.
For example, Hezbollah, right? They certainly, Soleimani worked with Hezbollah. He worked with factions inside Syria to wipe out tens of thousands, maybe hundreds of thousands of people. We know this guy is a bad guy, and it just is amazing to me that the Democrat Party is willing to stand effectively with the terrorists versus the President of the United States. I don't care what party he belongs to, but that's effectively what they're doing. But let's go back to Soleimani. This location that he was hit is questionable to me. You know, he was hit in Iraq. What in the wide world of sports he was doing in Iraq to begin with, I would like to know, at our airport that we financed and we built. But this was not an assassination. Soleimani was a military target in an active military zone.
Iran played a big role in the collapsing of the Iraq government in 2014. In January of 2014, when Iraq's deputy prime minister and his chief of staff, a general and a PhD chemist, came to the United States to plead with President Obama for help with the ISIS bombings on a daily basis that they couldn't control, Iran was behind supplying them with the bomb-making materials. Within 4 months, the Iraq government collapsed, and that vacuum was filled by Iran, and they still have influences today over parliament, the government, and the security forces.
Which is why we don't want the American forces, as much as we don't want to be there in Iraq. If we leave, the same darn thing could happen again, and I have a fear that it would be Iran this time to fill that vacuum instead of the Islamic State. But the War Powers Act is what the Democrats are talking about. I believe the War Powers Act is unconstitutional. I believe it violates the separation of powers. However, Washington, D.C. right now is guided by the War Powers Act, so we have to play by this rule. I want to read this one line, Grant, to you. The President, this is part of the War Powers Act, the President can send the U.S. armed forces into action abroad in case of a, quote, national emergency created by an attack upon the United States, its territories, or its possessions, or its armed forces. That embassy in Iraq, I do believe, contained our armed forces, it contained our possessions, it contained our diplomat, and this President of the United States has Benghazi fresh on his minds, as he should, to not let something like that happen again.
President Trump did what needed to be done, and he saved many lives as a result, and he saved our embassy. President Trump is a hero for what he did. He's a leader, and it needed to be done, and he did it. And I thank you, President Trump, for your leadership.
Speaking of leadership, at the rally he had in Ohio, he talked about Soleimani and taking him out and how important it was. This was in a rally setting, but he also talked about what was potentially down the road if he didn't take this guy out. I want to play this soundbite. Roll tape.
Soleimani was actively planning new attacks and he was looking very seriously at our embassies, and not just the embassy in Baghdad, but we stopped him, and we stopped him quickly, and we stopped him cold.
I don't know if the president declassified information right then at the rally in Ohio, but it sounds as if he gave us some new information there, that indeed this terrorist was targeting other U.S. assets. That's number one. And number two, it's important that we cut off the head of the snake here, because the head of the snake, number one, is not easily replaceable. And number two, all the people below the head of the snake, I believe, Grant, are running scared right now that they're going to meet the same fate.
What the president needs to understand is that the head of the snake actually are the explosive precursors that are being used to mass produce roadside bombs, suicide vests, and truck bombs. Soleimani's dead. There'll be many that will fall in line right behind him. The head of the snake are the explosive precursors. We need to collapse the IED supply chains to enhance safety of U.S. troops around the world.
So how do we do that, Grant? What's the best way to collapse this supply chain? Because you're dead on target. The supply chain can feed anywhere in the world. How do we target that?
Any nation receiving U.S. aid for counterterrorism, we need to have a policy in place that mandates the training and equipping of the indigenous police and military forces. They need to be trained and equipped to go out and identify what the Department of Defense has deemed the two explosive precursors that are used to manufacture more than 90% of the improvised explosive devices.
And Europe needs to be listening to this conversation. They need to be listening to the President of the United States, and they need to join us in sanctioning Iran and not working under the JCPOA, which is dead anyway. Iran killed it. President Trump didn't kill the JCPOA. Iran killed it. Iran killed it effectively when they signed on to it. And the Trump doctrine here is clear. Right now, it is maximum pressure on the terrorist regime in Iraq, and it's maximum security for United States assets all over the world, and that's pretty much what the doctrine should be. Grant, thanks.
Want to see more videos like this? Click on the link below and subscribe to One American News on YouTube, and call your cable provider and kindly demand that One American News is added to your lineup. Call and subscribe today.